I hope the future of preaching is dialogical, and I think it is, because we live in a participatory world. Mm-hmm. We live in a time, in an era in the Western Hemisphere when everybody wants to say in everything. Mm-hmm. And preaching as monologue made a lot of sense when the congregation was illiterate, when they had an 8th grade education, when they had no education, when the priest or the pastor was the smartest person in town. It made sense for that person to explicate the scripture mm-hmm. on Sunday. Now everyone's educated. And so we should all share in that exegesis and explication of scripture.
What about somebody like Tom Long, who says that preaching maybe needs to be episodic, that sometimes you'll do dialogues, sometimes you'll do monologues, sometimes you'll have drama, sometimes you'll have group participation, the whole idea being that we really need to mix it up in a culture that has so many different venues of entertainment.
I can see the idea of mixing it up and episodic preaching being powerful if the clergy person is in a congregation for the long haul. And that is rare. It is rare that a clergy person stays in a parish for many years in the main line. It is more common in the Methodist system. You get bumped every 3 or 4 years. In other systems, it's not much longer than that. And so you have to build up. People need, I do think people need constancy and consistency. So if you're going to be episodic about it, if you're going to do 4 weeks of narrative sermon, then you're going to do a couple weeks of deep, hardcore exegesis, and then you're going to do a week of dialogue, and then you're going to have a week with no sermon at all, and you just have music, you better not do that in your first year in the parish, because that'll be your last year in the parish, right?
Well, yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah. But if you've been there for 10 years, and you know and love the people, and they trust you, and the leadership is bought in, then it could work. Then it could really work. But people need some kind of constancy. I'd rather have it be relational constancy, and then that the form of the sermon is changed up. But without relational constancy, I think people probably need the form of the sermon to be constant.
Okay. So if the preacher is a constant over 9, 10, 12 years, then the content can be more varied.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But otherwise, that's probably not a wise
idea. It's a recipe for disaster. I mean, it's a great idea, but no congregation would stand for it.
Are there other ways to have dialogue other than the actual sermon itself that would be important, that might help preaching?
Yeah, I mean, you could prep your sermon in dialogue with people in the church, and I think more and more pastors are doing that. I don't think as many pastors as in the past lock themselves in the pastor's study and just crank it out themselves and then unlock the door on Sunday morning and deliver the word. I think a lot of pastors now, they post the text on Facebook, on their church's Facebook page, and they're asked for feedback and people drop notes to them, or they have a study group during the week where they meet with people and they talk about the text. So that's making it a more communal act, the sermon preparation, for sure.
Okay.
Well, here, let me tell you something I don't like, is when dialogue is a gimmick. When the pastor knows where the sermon's going to end, he's written the manuscript, but he uses dialogue in the middle of the sermon as a gimmick to keep people engaged. But it's not dialogue like, help me figure out where we're going to land this thing. It's like, look, I know where we're going to land the plane. I'm just going to put it on autopilot for a couple of minutes mid-flight, and let's all talk about this. And then I'll take back over the stick, and I'll bring it in for a landing because I know what this passage means. That is not dialogical, I don't think. That is using conversation as a rhetorical device.
Well, let me ask you something about dialogical preaching then. Are there times when it just gets totally off track and goes in places you're not comfortable with?
Almost never. It's almost never happened.
as a person who's seminary trained, as a PhD, you've never had an experience where it's gone off.
I mean, people ask me that all the time, and we've been doing this for 12 years. It doesn't happen. At our church, it doesn't. Maybe it would at others. Mm-hmm. And we've got, like, babbly, talk to themselves homeless people who come to our church. And they raise their hand and say stuff. And I mean, people say some stuff that... But I'll tell you what the biggest discipline, the biggest thing that those of us who are seminary trained have to be disciplined about. Keeping our mouths shut long enough for the community. Because if somebody says something that's a little bit whack, you know, if I can zip it long enough, 10 other people in the congregation are like, whoa, wait a second. Wait, I think that's not what the Bible means. Well, and this and that. So... but
that only happens if we keep our mouths shut.
Right, and our tendency, of course, is to be the first one to correct the unorthodox statement. But man, nothing roots out heresy like a group of people, in my experience.
Well, yeah, the communal understanding.
Yeah, for sure. It's just in practice, I've seen it. And I think if you were at an Episcopal parish or Presbyterian or Methodist, these are people who are a lot of them grew up in the faith. They know the Bible. They went to VBS and confirmation and summer camp. They know what it says. And if somebody says something that's like crazy, everyone in the community is going to say, that's crazy.
What about, this is totally off topic from my demon, but I want to ask you anyway. We'll put it on tape.
Yeah.
What about young people, high school age and college age? How tape?
Yeah.
What about young people, high school age and college age? How does this relate with them, and how do they work with it? And
well, I'll tell you this. I went to the same elementary school that my kids go to, and it looks very different. When I went to that elementary school, teacher stood in front at the blackboard, talked. We all sat in desks facing forward and listened and wrote stuff on our little notebook that she told us to. I go to my kids' school now. It's center-based classrooms. There's no front.
Right.
Kids look at each other all day. They move around. They engage with their teacher. Their teacher is down on his or her knees at their eye level. It's a conversational, it's a dialectical approach to learning. And it's because people understand there are multiple learning styles that kids have. And most kids don't learn best by being lectured at. But we act in the church like everybody learns the same way, by listening to a monologue. So I think that young people are going to be less and less, because they grew up in a public education system where there was a lot more dialogue and a lot more kinesthetic learning and a lot more participatory learning. And they're going to go to church and go like, nowhere in my life do I sit and listen to a 25-minute lecture. Yeah. Why would I voluntarily do it on Sunday morning? College lecture halls are changing. So the church is going to be left in the dust if we don't change the form of the sermon.
Well said.